Ethics at the University of Kansas. Brother Lang accepted Islam in 1982, and he is married and a father of 3 children. He is also the author of 2 books. The first book is Even the Angels Asked, and the second is Struggling to Surrender. I would like to invite Brother Lang to come, inshallah, and talk to us. Brother Lang will be talking to us about an hour, and then we, inshallah, will open the floor for questions and comments. تفضل يا أخي.
Is Mohammed Kharat here? Mohammed? Is he here? Mohammed Kharat? I have something for him. Yeah, he's coming. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be on. Peace be upon you. No, that's okay. I guess I'll stand. I sort of like standing. I'm sorry it's taking me a few minutes to get organized here. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate. This is, just to let you know where this is coming from, this is from the beginning of a book I wrote called Even the Angels Asked. And it deals with questions and issues that are central to Americans in particular, but Westerners in their encounter with religion. What difficulties they have with religion. I read in the Washington paper today that said that in my age group, the baby boom generation, 1/3 of us avow some allegiance to religion. 2/3 of people of my age group either don't believe in God at all or are undecided. And this article believed that statistic would become even more one-sided and dramatic with the next generation and then the next. So I want to sort of address that issue. Well, many scholars of Islam, both Muslim and non-Muslim, have observed that the Quran seems to have a tremendous power, even in this century, over the lives of Muslims. That is, that the Quran, more than almost any other community, religious community, I would even say very safely, more than any other religious community, the Quran seems to play a very intimate role in the everyday lives of Muslims. They chant it in their prayers. Many, many Muslims, a huge number of Muslims, a very large percentage, read a part of it every day. Rather than listen to music many times or some other type of entertainment, a Muslim, while driving his car, sitting in his house, or alone, will turn on the Quran and listen to it and get comfort from it. A famous Western scholar by the name of H.A.R. Gibb in the 1950s wrote, and he seemed to be quite surprised by that in this century, the Quran seems to have lost none of its power over the lives and hearts and minds of Muslims in this, the modern age. And I think if he was writing in 1990, although he's passed on now, he would have said that with even more emphatically. Arthur Arbery, when he translated or interpreted the Quran in English, he was affected personally by it. He said he was going through a very difficult time, and that it moved him and helped him through that very difficult time. And he said that when he heard the Quran chanted in Arabic, it was like listening to the beat of his own heart. And Frederick Denny from Colorado, a professor, I believe, at the University of Colorado, or Colorado State, I can't remember which. But he wrote that even when a person like himself, a professor of Islamic studies, a non-Muslim, studies the Quran on an objective level, on a research level, there comes a time in the reading of the Quran where you feel that you're in the presence of this tremendous, mysterious power. And he described that feeling as being somewhat frightening, but also exciting and powerful. And he said that unique power of the Quran, he believed, was behind the current Muslim revival and gives Islam its permanent resilience, its continuous resilience and power in the lives of Muslims. But one aspect of the Quran that I think is seldom studied and seldom discussed by Muslims and non-Muslims scholars is the ability of the Quran to transform people's lives, to win converts to the religion. I know that other religions have stories of people that have converted to their religion out of contact with their particular scripture. But in the annals of Muslim history, these stories are prolific. They're everywhere. And they occur again and again and again. In modern times, in the most recent times, I have many, many friends, and I'll include myself among them, who, just through the study of the Quran, became Muslims. Gary Miller of Canada said he knew no Muslims at all. He was alone, far away in Canada. There wasn't a Muslim for miles. He read the Quran, decided he had to enter this religion. And others, like Amina Silmian, etc., and etc., many, many brothers and sisters will testify to the fact that they either became Muslim or remained Muslim because of the Quran. And this power of the Quran, the power to transform, to take a disbeliever and make him a believer, to take a rejecter and make him a devotee, to take someone who has a tremendous animosity to Islam and to win him over, is an extremely important thing that we must explore for two reasons. One, because here in America we're trying to share our religious perceptions, our experience, as authentically and sincerely as we can with others. And so we need to know, what is it about the Quran that reaches others? How can we direct that to them? How can we relate that to others? And second, and most importantly, we have an entire generation of children, our children, coming up, growing up in America, who naturally are both American, fully, and Muslim. Hopefully. Hopefully. And we find them on the fence, forced into weighing and balancing and choosing. And believe me, they will. Does this make sense? How does this compare with this? They're facing a very difficult time in their lives, where they often see this choice as a choice between one system and one totally opposed to it, and it's an extremely difficult thing for them. And so we need to know how to reach them as Americans, which they are, how to relate this religion to them in ways that they will understand. I've had many Muslims tell me, should I give the Quran to a non-Muslim? And today I would like to argue the case that yes, you should. Because more often than not, the only thing that makes a person a Muslim or keeps someone after that person becomes a Muslim is the Quran. It's the greatest power that Muslims have. And very often we give lectures on fiqh, and we give lectures on science, and we give lectures on Islamic government, and we give lectures on women in Islam, and we give lectures on so many things. But we never really share with others the experience of the Quran. Well, in talking to many others like myself that have become Muslim, Americans, and many of my friends that have were once atheists or agnostics. They either disbelieved in God entirely or were just undecided about it, decided not to deal with it. Many of us in our conversations and our reflections found that our perceptions and our reflections intersected in many key points along our way to conversion to Islam. And as I visualize it in my head, I see that these points seem to trace out a certain characteristic path to Islam. And so today, in the next 50 minutes or so, I would like to invite you on that path. Just the beginnings of it. I'd like to invite you on a journey to Islam in America, with special influence on how the Quran works on the minds of someone who is not a Muslim. What is the dynamics of that relationship? How does it take place? Let me remind you of an ancient story, of a rather dramatic conversion. I'm sure you all remember the story of Omar, how he converted to Islam. It was one of the most dramatic early conversions. Why? Because all the previous conversions were of people that either were not wholly antagonistic to Islam. Many of them were friends of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, loved ones, relatives, people close to him, people who at least trusted him. But none that were such devout enemies to him and his movement as Omar. Omar, this fierce Meccan aristocrat, this fierce, powerful warrior who the Prophet, peace be upon him, once joked that when Satan saw him, he'd reverse direction and flee. This powerful enemy of Islam one day set out to put an end to this divisive movement as he saw it. And how was he going to do that? He was going to put its leader to the sword. And so on his way, he encountered a fellow Meccan. And the fellow Meccan asked him where he was setting out to, and Omar told him his deadly mission. And he said, well, before you do that, you better put your own house in order, because your sister and her husband are among his followers. Suddenly, Omar's rage, which had reached a fever pitch, was now diverted to his own family. And he rushed over to his sister's abode to see if this was in fact true. And he found out that it was, for him, the worst possible way, because as he moved closer and closer to the house, he heard the chanting of what had to be the Quran inside by his sister and her husband, and perhaps another person. But some of the versions say there may have been another. And so now his rage was boiled, and he burst in upon them. And he found that they were chanting it from a piece of parchment, and he demanded to see it. They refused. There was a scuffle. Blows were thrown. His sister was hit. Blood and tears dripped down her cheeks. Suddenly he was moved to brotherly compassion. And he calmed himself just a little. And he apologized. And everybody's nerves sort of calmed down, although it was still a tense situation. And he asked once again if he could see the parchment, now that his violence was cooled. His sister handed it to him. And he looked at the piece of parchment, and suddenly his entire countenance changed. His eyes that were once violent and flashing were now withdrawn and vacant, as if he had entered another world. Omar, who was ready to kill, was now totally absorbed in himself and the words that he was reading. The accounts say almost nothing of what happened after that. And from that we could surmise that Omar probably very quickly excused himself or dismissed himself and left, very deeply engrossed in thought. And shortly after that, the accounts differ, some say that day or a couple days thereafter, he set out once again in the direction of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But of course, this time not to put him to the sword, but to become one of his most ardent followers and one of the greatest leaders in the history of Islam. But we have to ask, what was the chemistry of that moment? How did that anger, that passion, that compassion, that rage, that sympathy, when confronted with the words before him, how did that combine to produce that convert to Islam? Is it just a dream? Is it a story made up? No, because it happens too often even today. So I would like you to help appreciate this. I would like us to begin that journey I spoke about, the journey to Islam in America. I won't be able to take you on the whole thing. It would take several hours up here, but I would at least just like to start us on that path, to give you a feel for the feelings, the dynamics of that relationship between the reader and the Quran, between the rejecter and that heavenly call. And so, I would like you to help you understand this best, and because this is the experience that I and my friends that have converted understand best, I would like for you to, just for a few minutes, for a little while, to assume sort of the hat of the atheist. I would like you to try to pretend for a little while that you are a Western American, born and bred person who, for one reason or another, has had great doubts about religion and has come to reject the idea of God. Just to help you understand this dynamics. Now, most Muslims believe that an atheist is somebody who just flippantly rejects religion out of selfishness, and he's a hedonist. But actually, that's very seldom the case. Most people that are atheists are there for very powerful, emotional, intellectual, psychological reasons. Having been one, I know. So to help you understand the attitude of the atheist, I'd like to share with you, just for a couple of minutes, my feelings towards atheism before I ever encountered Islam. Just to let you know what the emotions behind it are. Then I will approach the Quran with those feelings and let you see and hopefully experience to some degree that tension, that battle between the rejecter and the words he finds before him. Are you with me? Well, we go through lots of changes over the years. I know I have. So, for example, right now in my life, summer is my very favorite season. I love its sunshine and its warmth and its long days and long walks in the late afternoon. But when I was a child, 12 years old in Bridgeport, Connecticut, it was definitely winter. I loved the blizzards and snowball fights, ice football, sled riding, and ice hockey. But most of all, winter was a time of year that I could steal a few hours alone every once in a while with my father. Because the rest of the year, my father had to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week at his one-man refrigeration and air conditioning business. He was self-employed. And on certain Sundays, we would take our German Shepherd for a walk along the beach. And it was always one of my favorite times. My father always picked the most bitter days, stormy days, bleak and gray and frigid. That remind me now of those prize-winning photographs and paintings he did when he was a young man. There was something of an artist in my father, an artistic personality. Unfortunately, now he couldn't pursue that goal anymore because he was engrossed in trying to provide for a family of 5 boys. And rather than pursue what he considered to be those higher things, he had to pursue a very difficult, hard, and exhausting job. And he often came in very dirty and tired, in some sense, broken. On one of these walks along the beach, we had almost reached a point where my father and I usually turned back. When I looked up at him and I asked, "Dad, do you believe in heaven?" I was only 12 years old. I knew that I could depend on a straight answer, with no punches pulled. My mom, if I had asked her, would carefully estimate the possible repercussions of what she said. She wouldn't want to lead me into a direction of doubt or distrust. But my dad, he would answer the same regardless of who asked. That's just the way he was. He wouldn't answer thoughtlessly nor dispassionately. He would internalize and personalize the question, relate it to his own experience, and answer you in a very dramatic way. This time, though, he showed no reaction, kept on walking. And we continued on into the cold, damp, pounding gales that were blowing back my father's thick, graying hair and stinging my face. I began to wonder if he had even heard me, for it must have been a half a mile ago when I had asked him. Then suddenly, he slowed and stopped and turned towards the shoreline. And he looked out past Long Island when he said, almost to himself, I could believe in hell easy enough, because there's plenty of that here on earth. But heaven, and he paused and he shook his head, I can't conceive of it. I wasn't entirely surprised, even at that young an age. My father was extremely sensitive, and already I had learned and understood that life had robbed him of his goals and his dreams. Every night after work, he would come home and try to numb his anger. But more often than not, it would lead to violent eruptions of his frustrated passions. Anguish is contagious, and my father's dark and angry and cynical view of life infected all of his 5 boys. After all, we were only children, and we were emotionally defenseless. When others of my generation felt cheated by the Kennedy assassinations, or Vietnam, or the Watergate conspiracy, I was hardly even moved, because they were only confirmations of what I had already come to know of life. Religious types will criticize my father, and they do, for opening a door to doubt. But it had been unlocked for some time, or I would have never asked the question in the first place. If anything, my father's answer slowed my inevitable progress to atheism, because he was not an irreligious man. The fact that he had doubts seemed entirely natural. How can any sane and rational mind not have them, I thought. But he was nonetheless a believer, and he must have had some reason. And so I sought very hard to understand that reason for several years. But whatever it was, I never found out. And I continued to have problems with heaven. Because every time I thought that it was in God's power to create such a world, a heaven, a paradise, I had to ask myself, why did he create this one? Why, in other words, did he not place us permanently in heaven from the start, with us free of the weaknesses and the failings for which he'd punish us with earthly suffering? I came from a Christian background. Why not simply make us angels or something better? Put us into heaven from the beginning. Of course, I heard all that talk time and time again of God's infinite sense of justice. But I did not choose my nature. I did not create temptation. I did not ask to be born. And I didn't eat from any tree. And that's how I felt. Did it occur to no one that the punishment far exceeded the crime? Generation after generation of suffering humans because one person or two took a bite of an apple from a tree? I'm just trying to share with you the feelings of an atheist, brother and sisters. Even if only a symbol, which I was taught it was, it does tell us something of the divine nature, something that is extremely difficult to reconcile with quote-unquote mercy and quote-unquote love, which they were constantly trying to force down my throat. Oh, how I came to despise those words. They made me sick with revulsion. Love, mercy, mercy, love, love, mercy, mercy, love. Not only were we here for no good reason, but an infinitely innocent sacrifice, an acceptance of a blatant, incomprehensible contradiction were required before admitting us to paradise. The rest of us, not lucky enough to be born into the right creed or unable to suspend our reason, were destined to be consigned to eternal damnation. I thought to myself, would it not, for goodness sake, have just been better to leave us as a bad idea, never realized, as a mistake, never brought into fruition? It was all the sugarcoating, all the love, salvation, love stuff that made belief for me so unpalatable. I used to conceal my disregard behind an emotionless exterior as I listened to constant assurances of divine love. Like when you humor someone you feel has lost their mind. You know how that is? When you feel somebody is crazy and they're talking to you, you don't want to upset them, you don't want to make them nervous, and you don't want to hear them talk anymore. So you just sit there with an emotionless expression on your face. When it was clear that I was totally hopeless, we would eventually return to the real issue. which was, of course, the divine threat. But what if you are wrong? I was always told. What if you are wrong? What will happen to you if you are wrong in your atheism? As if you should believe on a hunch in order to hedge your bets in case this brutal, monstrous vision is a reality. Then I used to say that if I'm wrong, I'll still be right. For refusing to surrender to the irrational demands of an infinite tyranny. For refusing to indulge an unquenchable narcissism, a self-love that feeds on helpless pleas and suffering. And for refusing to accept responsibility and repent for a great and grand blunder that I didn't initiate. And in the end, I'll be an eternal victim of the greatest injustice. And in this way, I will forever represent a higher sense of righteousness than the one that brought me into being. And even though that may not ease my suffering in the eternal torture chamber, I used to say, it at least will give it meaning. A lot more meaning than this life ever held. And so that's the way I felt. So how in God's name did you ever become a Muslim? Many people have asked me that question, and this is not a direct answer, but I hope it will, if you read between the lines, you could get some indication. But the point, again, is to now adopt that sort of attitude, or at least try to let yourself empathize with that sort of attitude now. And you open the Quran for the first time, for whatever reason, and you're really opening it quite seriously. I'm just checking the time. And earnestly, and quite curiously, to see what it has to say about those great eternal questions that have kept you from religion all these years. And you turn to the opening surah. Like I said, I won't get too far, maybe. Pardon? Take your time. So if you open the beginning surah, it says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. And then it says, praise be to God, Lord of the worlds, the merciful, the compassionate. At first, coming from a Christian background, originally, and I'm not saying this to deprecate Christianity, it's just to help you understand. Coming from a Christian background, it seemed very much like a hymn of praise, something like a psalm in praise of God. Praise be to God, Lord of all worlds, the merciful, the compassionate. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, praise be to God, Lord of the worlds, the merciful, the compassionate. Quite a nice beginning, really, stressing God's mercy, compassion, control over all. And then suddenly, quite unexpectedly, the whole situation shifts. Master of the day of requital. Up to this point, the first three verses, we were going along smoothly. Then in the third, we face master of the day of requital, reminding us of our deepest anxieties, of our deepest problems with religion. Master of the day of judgment. As we proceed to the next verse, we get even deeper into the quagmire. You do we serve, and you we beseech for help. You do we serve, and you we beseech for help. From what, we say, my fellow atheists? From the day of requital. But who created that day? Here we are beseeching help and looking for guidance to free us from the very day that the one who created us is aiming us towards, possibly. All our atheistic fears, all our atheistic anxieties are being boiled right now. It started out beautifully, peacefully. We would have thought, at least give us time to warm up to the message. At least give us time to relax into the message. Then introduce these sort of things. But in fact, we will find that this Quran is no soft sell. Neither is it a hard sell. In fact, we'll find that it's no sell at all. This Quran is going to turn out to be no less than a challenge, a dare, a struggle to fight against its calling. And it will dare us and challenge us and face us with our very problems, time and time again as we proceed through the text. It'll constantly work this way. Challenge us with our own objections. Confront us with them and force us to think about them. We'll see it works this way time and time again. We move on to the 5th verse. Guide us on the straight path. The path of those whom you have favored. Not those upon whom is wrath, and not those who are lost. Notice a slight change as we go from verse 6 and 7. The path of those whom you have favored. And then in 7, it's a very personal statement, we go to an impersonal statement. Not those upon whom is wrath. They very often translate it, not those upon whom is your wrath. It doesn't say your wrath. It says, not those upon whom is wrath, and not those who are lost. As if to say that to obtain the straight path, that's conferred on those who seek guidance, who follow that guidance, who work to establish some relationship from God. Those who don't, those who reject guidance, those who do not seek guidance, those who have no relationship with God, upon them is wrath, and upon them is utter loss. As atheists, we know this loss. We know this aimlessness. We know this wrath of life too well. We have lived it. We have internalized it. We made it the foundation of our philosophy. We made it our reason for rejecting the idea of a personal God. It's the foundation of our philosophy. But what this verse is telling us seems to be that for those who do not have God's guidance, for those who are rejectors of the idea of God or rejectors of having a relationship with God, for them is just utter loss and disillusion. For them, life seems painful. Life seems arbitrary. Life seems suffering. Life seems wrathful. Life seems punishing. Life seems tormenting. And it seems utterly aimless and full of loss. So as atheists, we could certainly appreciate that comment. Now we move through the 7 verses very quickly. And almost everybody who first picks up the Quran does. There was a subtle shift in mood between the first 4 verses that glorified God and the last 3 verses that asked for God's guidance. More than likely, we didn't even notice this shift when we first read the Quran. Praise be to God, Lord of all worlds, the merciful, the compassionate, master of the day of judgment. To you alone we pray, to you alone we seek help. Up to that point, it's a divine praise. Then show us the straight path. The path of those whom you have favored, not those upon whom is wrath and utter loss. Without us quite realizing it, there was a shift. Went from divine praise to a petition, a prayer. We probably finished the verse, the surah, before we even realized that we just sent up a prayer to heaven. It sort of snuck up on us. We were not quite conscious of it. We had to go back and reread what we just wrote, what we just went over, to realize that we had unintentionally sent up a petition, a prayer to heaven. But we're going to find, as we open the next surah, that whether we intended it or not, whether we did it consciously or unconsciously, whether we did it deliberately or unintentionally, that prayer has reached its destination. And it's about to receive an answer. And as you return to the next surah, you find this in a very dramatic way. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Alif Lam Mim, Dhalika Kitab, La Rayba Fi, Huda Lil Muttaqin. Alif Lam Mim, the 3 mysterious letters that begin that surah. 29 similar surahs begin with mysterious letter symbols. I don't want to dwell on that right now. You're likely not to if you're reading it for the first time. But then it says, that is the book. That is the book. We're in no doubt. Is guidance for those, literally, if you don't add anything to it, if you just read it as the pre-Islamic Arabs might, for those who are fearing, for those who have fear. who believe in the unseen and are steadfast in prayer and spend out of what we have given them, and who believe in that which is revealed to you and that which was revealed before you, and are certain of the hereafter. These are on guidance from their Lord, and these, they are the successful. Notice how it begins, though. Dhalika Kitab. That is the book. If I were to write this, if I were writing a book to you, I would say to you, this is the book. Why? Because I'm a human writing to a fellow human, and I'm sharing with you a perspective. As one human to another, we typically write this way. This is the book. You sort of have, in the image in your hand, two people sitting side by side. We're holding the book, and I'm telling you, this is the book. We're in no doubt. But the Quran approaches us in a much more dramatic way, in a much more powerful way. That is the book. Which book? This book? That book. The Quran? Yes, that book. The Quran. That book. That is the book. We're in no doubt. Is guidance for those who fear, etc. Showing you that, number one, that's an answer to your prayer. Number two, it comes from one who does not share your perspective. He's infinite and transcendent and all-powerful. He created you. He doesn't share your perspective, and you could never share his. He's telling you from afar, that is the book that you have there, because everything is within his possession. Everything okay? So that is the book. We're in no doubt is guidance for those who have fear. Pardon? Oh, all right. Notice the emphasis put on fear and doubt from the very start. Very interesting. Because let's face it, we all do have doubts. Even we have doubts, and let's be honest and admit it, my fellow atheists. If we didn't have doubts, we wouldn't be making this journey. We wouldn't be interested in discussing with people their religious beliefs. We do it to confirm our disbelief. We do it to test and make sure that our disbelief is sound. We're taking this journey to make sure that we are right, because deep in our hearts there is at least a kernel, a whisper of doubt that we might be wrong. And also a whisper of fear. Fear that if there is a God, then we would be ignoring the most important aspect of our existence. So even though verse 3, 4, 5 don't really apply to us so well, because we're definitely not believers, we shouldn't exclude ourselves from verse 2, because we do possess doubt, and we do possess fear, as all people do, and the Quran seems to address that right there and then. If you read on, verse 6 and 7, talk about those who utterly reject guidance, those who just don't want to be concerned, they're not going to open their hearts or minds to it, they just are complete and total rejectors. And appropriately, the Quran dismisses them in one verse. Verse 6 brings them in, verse 7 kicks them out. Verse 8 through 20 then starts talking about those who are in between, the believers and the rejectors, those who are not quite here or there, those who are lost in worldly pursuits, those who are blinded sometimes by worldly pursuits, those who sometimes think about these things, but for the most part ignore them. We, as I just mentioned, are probably in that category. The Quran would put us there. We're not utterly rejecting the idea, but we have severe doubts, and perhaps we've devoted ourselves, nowadays at least, to worldly aims. Verse 21 through 29 very quickly summarizes the major themes of the Quran. The Day of Judgment, the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Verse 26, I think, talks about the use of symbols and other things, the hereafter, etc. Just like a writer of a book, but infinitely greater. The Quran in verses 1 through 29 describes its audience. First, who will benefit most by this message? What are the prerequisites? Just like when I write a calculus book. In order to understand this book, you need to know this, this, and this. These people will benefit most. These people will benefit least. These people are in the middle. And then you would quickly summarize the contents. And the Quran does, very interestingly. And then you come to verse 30, where the Quran begins the heart of its message, the origins of man. And so I would like us to begin there. So we come to verse 30. And it says, "Behold, your Lord said to the angels, I am going to place a khalifa," is the Arabic word. For now, I'll just say a vicegerent on earth. They said, "Will you place therein one who will spread corruption and shed blood? Will we celebrate your praises and glorify your holiness?" He said, "Truly, I know, but you do not know." What a dramatic opening, especially for us. Remember who we are. We are atheists. Why don't we believe in God? Because of all the senseless suffering in the world. Why not pop us into heaven in the first place? Our famous question. And here, when we read verse 30, we look at this question the angels ask. That's why I call the book Even the Angels Ask. We look at this question and it says, "Will you place therein one who will spread corruption and shed blood? Will we celebrate your praises and glorify your holiness?" Why are you going to create this corrupt creature? This one who's going to suffer and create suffering. Who's going to shed blood. Notice that Adam, peace be upon him, hasn't even appeared on the scene yet. You could argue about whether he's created now or not, but one thing there's no doubt about from the sequence is he's done no wrong. And yet, God is telling us, or the Quran is telling us, I'm going to place a vicegerent on earth. This is part of my plan. He hasn't done anything wrong yet. It's not saying I'm going to put him there because I'm going to punish him. He says I'm going to place a vicegerent on earth. The angels ask the atheist question. I mean, not that they're atheists, but they ask our question. Will you put therein one who will shed blood and spread corruption? Will we celebrate your praises and glorify your holiness? Notice the power of the question. Think of who the question is coming from. It's coming from the angels. Picture in your mind, brothers and sisters, what your image of an angel is. When writers write about Mother Teresa in the newspaper, they call her an angel of mercy. We think of somebody perfect, kind, compassionate, the best of humanity. When somebody does something very kind for us, we say, that person is such an angel. We think of human perfection, the goal to which we aspire in some sense. When my 3 daughters are asleep at night and they're sleeping there in bed so serene and beautiful and quiet, I say to my wife, aren't they angels? I had utter peace with themselves. But look who this question is coming from. The angels. Why are you going to create this patently corrupt being with this great potential for destruction and suffering and evil when you could create us, angels? As they explicitly say, when we celebrate, not anybody else, when we, the angels, celebrate your praises and glorify your holiness. It's also extremely important when we realize where this question is coming from. What environment? No less than heaven itself, paradise. Why not pop us into heaven from the start? That's our question. Why put mankind on earth where he could realize his most base and evil intentions? Why put him in an environment where he could practice his most evil inclinations? Imagine you're an atheist and you come upon this verse, and in the very mouth of the angels is your question. And then the answer, truly I know, but you do not know. Many Western scholar of Islam has said that the Quran just dismisses the question there. Just says, I know what you do not. The question is dismissed, and it never deals with it. But as we'll see in the verses that come, and throughout the Quran, it deals with this question. little by little, piece by piece, driving us, guiding us, showing us a direction towards an answer. And like I said, I won't be able to get too far today, but I hope I could just give you a flavor of this encounter of the disbeliever with the Quran. Our initial encounter with the Quran, let me just say this, has been... Are you getting tired? I notice some of you are looking at your watches. It's been a long day. Our initial encounter with the Quran has been anything but pleasant. It has been distressful and irritating. One of two things is going on here. Either this author is completely unaware of possible philosophical problems and objections, or else he is deliberately provoking us with them. We are mere 37 verses into the Quran, and our anxiety and our resentment has been aroused to a fever pitch. We ask, why indeed subject man to earthly suffering? Why not remove us to heaven or place us there from the first? Why must we struggle to survive? Why create us so vulnerable and self-destructive? Why must we suffer broken hearts and broken dreams, lost loves and lost youth, crises and catastrophes? Why must we experience pains of birth and pains of death? Why we beg in our frustration? Why we plead in all our sorrow and our emptiness? Why we insist in our anguish? Why we scream out to the heavens? Why we plead with the angels? Why, if you are there and you hear us, tell us, please, why? Why create man? But verse 31 does pick up the issue, and it doesn't dismiss it. And I'll just go a little bit further, and then I'll have to... All right. I'll tell you what I tell my students. When you're getting exhausted, raise your hand. But I'll probably get exhausted first. And so we come to verse 31, which says, and he taught Adam the names of all things. And then he placed them before the angels and said, tell me their names if you are right. Notice that this verse very clearly, unlike many an Orientalist says, is very clearly addressing the angel's question. And we taught Adam the names of all things. And we placed these things before the angels and said, tell them their names if you are right in your question. Notice what's being emphasized here. Adam is what? He's taught, quote unquote taught. He's a learning creature. We'll soon find out of a superior nature to the other creatures about. It's emphasizing his learning ability. He's taught the names of all things. And then he's placed them before the angels. What is he being taught? He's taught to be able to name, to be able to assign verbal symbols to his ideas, to his reflections, to his experiences, to his past, to his future goals, to his hopes, to his dreams, all things. It's seems to be emphasizing man's unique ability to communicate through verbal symbols. In another surah, the 96th surah, talks about man's unique ability to do this in writing, and how this is one of the greatest bounties God ever gave mankind. Read in the name of your Lord who created man out of a creature that clings. Read, for your Lord is the most bountiful, who taught man the use of the pen. What did he teach him? Taught him what he knew not, or for that matter, could not know. Because through verbal communication and reading and writing, mankind could learn on a level like no other creature in its midst. So that all human learning, all human knowledge, this unique ability of man to name and communicate, gives all human learning a preeminent cumulative character. And right away we see that being emphasized in this answer to the angel's question. They said, in verse 32, glory to you. We have no knowledge except what you taught us. In truth, it is you who are knowing, the wise. Here we see the angels admit that they can't do the task. Why not? They don't have enough knowledge, number one. Number two, they acknowledge that this would require a great deal of knowledge and wisdom that they do not possess, that they do not have the capacity for. God did not give them that. They may have some knowledge, wisdom, but not enough required to perform this task. In the next verse, we find out that man, Adam, can do it. He couldn't perform the task. He said, "Oh, Adam, tell them their names." When he had told them their names, God said to the angels, going back to their question, Did I not tell you that I know what is unseen in the heavens and the earth, and I know what you reveal and what you conceal? Here we find that the angels are indeed inferior to Adam in this respect. In his respect for knowledge, intellect, ability to be taught, ability to communicate on a level similar to man, to learn on that level. And this is in part, the beginnings of an answer to the question. But notice also it says, "Did I not tell you what you reveal and what you conceal?" What did the angels reveal in their question? Think about it. They revealed the worst aspects, the worst human potential, the very bottom that man could descend to. But what did their question conceal? It concealed the reciprocal, interrelated capacity of man to do great acts of goodness, voluntarily, volitionally. The question only revealed one half of the story. It didn't reveal the complementary ability of man to do great acts of good, and to learn goodness and virtue, and to grow in that. Certainly he could grow evil. He could do terrible wrong. But with that ability comes the related capacity, the complementary capacity, and I underline the word complementary, to grow in goodness and virtue and nearness, as we'll come to see later, to God. Trying to rush along here. I only have a few verses left. "And behold, he said to the angels, bow down to Adam. And they bowed down." This shows for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, the Quran is showing us that in this capacity of man, man is potentially superior, even to the angelic hosts. Potentially. He could sink to greater depths, but he could rise to greater heights. But not so Iblis. He refused, and he was proud, and he was of the rejectors. Notice, now he enters Iblis. And with Iblis, the birth of temptation, the great eternal tempter. But it's interesting. What is his failing? We're just sort of going off on a tangent for a second. What is his failing? What is his undoing? And it's pride. You know, in Western thought, they always say money is at the root of all evil. It's a famous saying. But as the Quran would have it, money is not really at the root of all evil. It's pride, arrogance, self-centeredness. That's at the root of all evil. And it's through this door that we are often undone. Let me see. And we said, "O Adam, dwell you and your spouse in the garden, and eat freely thereof of what you wish. But come not near this tree, for you will be among the wrongdoers." Thus the famous and fateful command. Yet the tone of it seems curiously restrained, understated. There's no indication at all that God is somehow threatened by this choice of theirs. That somehow their eating from the tree would in any way diminish it. As a matter of fact, the concern of this verse doesn't seem to be about God being worried about anything at all, as far as his own infinite greatness is concerned. His concern is with Adam and his spouse. Then you will be among the wrongdoers. So God presents, of course Satan later says, you could have a kingdom that decays not, and etc. But we find that Satan's insinuations are totally fabricated. There's nothing to them, according to the Quran. God is in no way threatened by this choice. But on the other hand, this choice is clearly a moral choice. It's not just a command. God gives them a moral command. It involves a moral choice, as it clearly says, because then you will be among the wrongdoers. This is a question of right and wrong. The way the Quran presents it is as if the tree is not anything really special. no indication that this tree is going to do anything to God. It's not going to threaten him whatsoever. Almost as if it was picked at random. Go not near this tree. Because if you go near it, you'll be among the wrongdoers. But Satan caused them to slip. Interesting choice of words, to slip. Ezra. And expelled them from the state in which they were. And we said, go you all down, some of you being the enemies of others, and on earth will be your dwelling place and provision for a time. Well, my fellow atheists, we have to admit it that once again the Quran seems to have a penchant for understating things. Satan caused them to slip. One of the greatest sins of all eternity, and it's called a slip, an unintentional slip, which is what the Arabic word literally means. A sin for which all mankind will have to experience tremendous torture, and it's called a slip. And Satan caused them to slip and expelled them from the state in which they were. How could this be called a slip? A slip? A minor error? But if we think about it, we have to remove ourselves from our previous religious background. Maybe we're reading into it something that really isn't there. As we said before, there's no indication that our life on earth is a punishment for some sin for which all mankind has to pay. It's not a punishment. God has other purposes by putting us here on earth. Yes, indeed. According to the Quranic look at this whole picture, it is a slip. He didn't kill anyone. He didn't murder anyone. He didn't commit adultery. As a matter of fact, we find shortly later that God raises Adam, peace be upon him, to the level of one of his elect. He has an outstanding character. He just slipped. The significance seems to be that man, for the first time, has made a moral choice. And if we look at things up to this point and summarize what has happened, first we see a point where man is being taught. We see a period of intellectual growth. Now we see he's presented a moral choice. So he grows intellectually, he's being nurtured, brought along by God, and now he's presented with a moral choice, and with that moral choice begins the next stage in his development. A plan envisioned and brought about by God's wisdom. It doesn't really quite tell us why, but it is just a slip. This was definitely a moral choice. And man, with that choice, takes on a moral nature. We see it in other verses that talk about how he's now shy about his body and how he covers himself up. He takes on a certain sense of modesty, etc. With that choice, mankind enters the moral phase in his development. Now, under normal circumstances, we would know now what to expect. We've been terrified by it ever since we were children, if we grew up here, for example. It shook us from our sleep, and it required our mothers to calm our fears. And unlike other nightmares, this nightmare never went away when we awoke, because it was confirmed by everyone we trusted. We know that there is about to be unleashed on mankind a rage, a violence, a terror, the like of which has never been known before, either before or since. Like a huge, thundering, black, and terrifying storm cloud looming on the horizon and heading straight for us, mankind is about to be engulfed in an awesome fury. And when that smoke clears, mankind will find himself sentenced what? To life on earth, where he and all his descendants will suffer and struggle to survive by their sweat and toil. They will experience illness, agony, and death. They will suffer endless pain and torment, and in all probability, more of the same and even worse in the life to come. This is what we were taught, and this is what we know. And the woman. To her belongs the greater punishment and the greater humiliation. For it was she, we were taught, she who duped Adam with her beauty and her charms. It was she who allied herself with Satan, an alliance for which Adam, of course, was no match. It was she that corrupted his innocence and exposed his weaknesses. And so it was she who will ache and bleed monthly. It will be she who will scream out in her labor pains. It'll be she who will bear the brunt of greater humiliation and drudgery, because the man will be made to rule over her, in spite of the fact that he is apparently her intellectual inferior, because he gave in so easily to her guile and her manipulation. So we wince and we shudder as we turn to the terror that we have always known. We cringe and we cower as we peek to the next verse, knowing full well what to expect. We read the words before us. Then Adam received words from his Lord, and he turned to him in mercy. Truly he is oft returning, the merciful. What is this? What is this talk of mercy and turning compassionately towards man? Where's the passion, the jealousy, the anger we've always known, erupting out of control? In this verse, and those that follows, and others like it in the Quran, which relate the same episode, the tone is first and foremost consoling and assuring. God immediately pardons Adam and Eve. And then he gives him promises and revelation and tells him he has nothing to fear if he just follows that, seeks that guidance and follows that. It's assuring and consoling. Our minds are swimming in confusion now. Now wait a minute. God immediately turns to them kindly and mercifully and gently and forgives them. Okay, pop them back into heaven. No, wait, we're thinking like we used to think in the old. Life is not a punishment. He doesn't pop them back into heaven because apparently life isn't a punishment. It serves another purpose. The next verse supports that viewpoint. Well, there are others. In any case. So look what the next verse said. He said, "Go down from this state, all of you together." It repeats the same thing again. But here again it emphasizes the way that God consoles Adam, reaches out, assures him. Go down, all of you together. So we'll make no mistake about it that this is not a punishment. And truly there will come to you guidance from me. And whoever follows my guidance, no fear shall come upon them, nor shall they grieve. Very consoling, very reassuring. But of course, life has definite consequences. It has to be taken seriously. This is no game. It has serious consequences on the individual. How he lives that life will determine what he is on the day of judgment. The choices that he makes, the decisions that he makes, will affect the very what he will become. And so we're told that those who are rejectors and give the lie to our signs, these are the companions of the fire. They will abide in it. And so this is the pattern that will develop in the Quran. Reassuring, always giving hope, always giving assuring, always reaching out. Similarly, always telling you that this has grave consequences and this is no game. This is serious. How you live your life determine how you will be raised. The story of Adam ends here, and I'm going to end here, to be taken up in bits and pieces later. And I hope I've given you some sort of flavor for the sort of dynamics that takes place between someone who rejects this message and how this message confronts it very powerfully, even from the very beginning. Many questions and problems have been raised, and I know I haven't had time to address them. But we have obtained some clues and clarifications. Let me just state a few of them quickly, and then I'll introduce the questions. This is another characteristic of the Quran. It'll raise problems, it'll raise objections, but it doesn't feed you the whole story at once. Rather than provide several distinct and complete discourses on various topics, rather than to give you a 100-page thesis on theology, it interweaves themes throughout the text. And I'm sure all you know that. In this way, the Quran baits the reader. It lures him or her into its design, so that its different approaches are allowed to frequently and repeatedly exert their influence. Although the picture is still far from clear, some definite themes have emerged, which invite further reflection and elaboration. The most striking fact we observed is that the Quran does not maintain that life on earth is a punishment. Long before Adam and Eve enter the story, the angels raise the troublesome question, why create man? A series of verses start to supply pieces of an answer. Man has a relatively higher intelligence than other creatures. His nature is more complex, and he has a greater degree of personal freedom, so that he has not only the potential for growth in evil, but reciprocally, he has the potential for growth in virtue. We witness a period of preparation where man learns to use his intellectual gifts. Adam, somewhat innocuously, although from the standpoint of their development, makes a critical moral choice. They slip, it's a slip, and enter a moral phase in their existence, which is symbolized in other Quranic passages that have the couple now conscious of sexual morality and modesty. Thus, they depart from a state of ignorance, but innocence and bliss. Ignorance is bliss. Man's higher intellect, freedom of choice, his growth potential, will inevitably involve him in conflict and travail, the last of these being the focus of the angel's question. And as we proceed along on this journey, although this is as far as we're going to get today, I wish I had more time, the Quran will repeatedly stress these three features of the human venture: reasoning, choice, and adversity. Unfortunately, my time only permits me to go this far, but I hope you get some feel for the dynamics, the dialogue, the power of this scripture in dealing with somebody who rejects it. And may the peace and mercy of God be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Okay. We would like to thank our brother, thank him very much, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward him. Our brother took us in a journey in the heart and the mind of the individual who is seeking the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide all humanity, inshallah, to the truth and to Islam, inshallah. Now we'll open the floor for questions and comments. You can come to the microphone and ask the questions, and the sisters can bring their papers to us, inshallah. Yeah, we'll start with the question from the sisters. Go ahead, brother.
You don't have to ask a question, madam. Nobody has to ask a question.
Okay. Well, you come.
Assalamu alaikum. Brother Lang, I just want to make a statement. My son is a student at the United States Merchant Marine Academy, and he's about to graduate. And he gets a whole page in the yearbook, and he had a chance to make a statement. And we pondered on it and everything as to what he could say to really make a difference, because he does a lot of dawah and he's a very good, pious Muslim. So we came up with thousands of ideas as to what could he say in that page that would make a difference. And he was home the other day, and I asked him, I said, son, what did you decide to put in there? And he said, I just wrote, read the Quran. And I was like, my first thought was, is that all you said? You had a chance to make a statement to future generations that will look back. And then it's been on my mind, and I keep thinking about it, and as I think about it, it makes more and more sense. And today when you started your speech, it hit me like a ton. Read the Quran. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's true. Whenever I talk to anyone, I tell them, you really want to know about Islam, read the Quran. I tell them the same thing. Because, let's face it, Islam is not it's not just a religion. We say it all the time. But it's submission. It's surrender. It's a personal venture. And if you want someone to experience that venture, I wouldn't tell them that Islam is all these rules and regulations in this big, huge system. Let them have that personal experience. And so I would definitely agree with you. Let me just share with you one story. I mentioned how an atheist reacts to the Quran. But that doesn't mean that the only people I would suggest handing this to is an atheist. I remember one sister who is a very sincere Muslim lady, And she became a Muslim about a year and a half after I did. And she and her husband both converted, and they came to my house. They're now divorced, though. They came to my house, and they wanted to discuss some marital problems they were having. I won't mention their name or the marital problems. But it had to do with his seemingly lack of commitment to the religion. And she was quite concerned. So in any case, we got into a discussion. And she said at one point, she said, you know, what always appealed to me in the Quran, what always reached me, was the tremendous mercy of the Quran, the tremendous beauty, the tremendous kindness. When I read the Quran, all I see is God's mercy and kindness and compassion reaching out to my heart and grasping. And her husband said, now he was living he wasn't quite living up to the demands of the religion. He was sort of womanizing and still drinking and things like that. And I'm not saying that to put him down, only to give some background to his answer. He said, when I read the Quran, all I see is chastisement and threats and anger and criticism. I didn't know what to say. I was sort of taken back. I didn't want to say, well, you're wrong and she's right. And then she looked at me and then at him and said, looking directly at him, said, well, maybe at this point that's what you need to hear. And I thought that was a beautiful response, because it seems that if you talk to the various converts to Islam, they all sort of followed a similar path, but what actually reached them and their personality was distinctly different. But that's the beauty of the Quran, and why I'm supporting what you said, is because we try to strategize, come up with a strategy for dealing with non-Muslims. But the Quran seems to be able to reach these people's hearts regardless of their differences. I agree with you.
Now, a question from the brother side.
Gentlemen, if you're tired, you don't have to. It's been lots of hours.
You asked us in the beginning of your presentation to meditate Al-Quran, and I would like you to explain how do you understand Al-Quran linguistically. You approach it probably philosophically, but how do you understand it linguistically? We say it in Arabic, for example, Al-I'jaz al-Lawi, the linguistic miracles of the Quran. So how do you understand these issues?
Well, I'm not a linguist, and I'm definitely not a linguist specializing in Arabic. I'll just say that when I study the Quran, this is sort of related. It's kind of a semi-answer to your question. When I studied it, like most Muslims, I studied Arabic grammar for a few years, and I could read the Quran with the help of lexicons. But basically what I do is when I go through the Quran and verses catch my attention or seem to be especially capture my attention at any point, what I do is I get out all my resources, my resources in the Arabic language, and I get them out and I go through the words one by one and go back to the grammar that I've learned and try to get that meaning as, in some sense, primitively as possible, or purely as possible. I try as best as I can, and this is extremely difficult, to experience that verse as if I was a person living in 7th century Arabia and hearing it for the first time. Because if you go to interpretations of the Quran, those interpretations are exactly that, those English renditions. It's a particular person's reading of the text being given to you. But I find that the more you understand what those words meant to the people who first heard them, without their later embellishments, the more those verses seem to be able to address your situation, the more power they seem to have. So I hope that partly answers your question.
Okay. We have the second question here from a sister. How would you suggest a Muslim give da'wah to an atheist?
Well, first of all, I would very much suggests that you do not go after them, you let them come after you. Atheists don't like, having been one, and I think I was somewhat typical. No atheist likes to be, and I think many people in general do not like to be. Nobody likes to be the target of a conversion effort. Especially in America where there's such fear of religion, period. Especially among my generation. Anybody used to come up to me and say, can I grab a few minutes of your time to tell you that? I immediately shut the door on that person. I just wanted to have nothing to do with it. I wanted to do the asking, you do the answering. I wanted to do the exploring, you help me out. But don't try to sell me a bag of goods. What generally happened was atheists are curious about other people's religious beliefs. Very often they will ask you when they notice you're of a certain religion, and Muslims kind of stand out, what do you guys believe about this? The typical mistake Muslims make is they over-answer the question. I remember asking people, what do you believe about original sin, or do you have any similar concept? Then he would say, no, not really. We believe each person has to pay for his own deeds, suffers their consequences, positively or negatively. But you should understand that we don't persecute women. I never asked. I never said you did. I never said you didn't. I don't care if you do. Right now, I want to know about this question. And then the person there were so many times I'd be seized by a missionary, Muslim or Christian or whatever, and I'd ask them a question, and they would spend 20 minutes just giving me a long speech about the religion, telling me all my misconceptions about it, which, by the way, 90% of them I didn't have. It's a very wrong method. I think especially in America, you will have plenty of opportunity to express your point of view, and you should be ready to do that intelligibly in a way that Americans could relate to. But stop chasing after people. It's really irritating. I still, you always meet Muslims who, to this day, want to impose their particular interpretation of Islam on you. Will not give up till you accept 100% their way of thinking. Oh my God, that's just so painful to put up with, really. I really wish people wouldn't do that.
It says, you said that you encourage giving the Quran to a non-Muslim when it is said, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. It couldn't be touched unless by those who are clean and pure. It would be better to give the English version or translation of the Quran. I think what the brother meant is giving the translation of the meaning of the Quran, because especially most of the people here do not speak Arabic, do not know Arabic.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't serve any purpose to give them the Quran in Arabic to read. He means giving them the translation of the meaning of the Quran. Isn't that true, brother? What you?
Yeah, in America, I don't think anybody would be able. Most people you give the Quran to wouldn't be able to read Arabic. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. There's some very good interpretations out there. You should be. And they're not perfect, as I said, but they do a nice job of appealing to a Western mentality. I know that Yusuf Ali's interpretation, Muhammad Assad's in particular, Muhammad Ali's, I've gotten a lot of criticism. Some people say it's too ambiguous at places, it's not clear what they're trying to say. You have to realize that when you're dealing with a Western audience or Western mentality, things are not always so clear. They prefer to be sort of ambiguous when they are not sure of things. I find that these three interpretations, and they are interpretations, seem to appeal to a Western mind most. And I really am sort of disenchanted by the fact, or disappointed by the fact, that some people are really sort of giving these three interpreters a lot of flack these days. Frankly, I found that for myself, sure, every Western reader knows they're not perfect. They know their interpretations, but these three I could relate to these much easier than, say, the very nice interpretation done by a group of scholars recently from Saudi Arabia, for example. Because the mentality of somebody like Muhammad Assad, Yusuf Ali, is closer to my own. I could relate easier to them. But the Saudi scholars, as much as their English is perfect, have a very difficult time there's a lack of communication.
Yeah, we have this last question, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah.
Because we're very running late for the Salat al-Dhuhr. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. I know there's a tight of time, but I have really main question. I have several questions, but I'm going to, inshallah, delay these questions for later on. Probably I'll sit with you. But the main question here, I have a little confusion as far as when you start to attach to the first surah and the second surah. I found where there is disappearing of the Jewish and the Christian, where there is atheists substitute their position more than, that's what I observed in the beginning. What I'm trying to say there is substitution for the Jewish and Christian by atheists, and taking that position. I probably misunderstood some, but this is the main things.
Right. You feel that those verses are mostly talking about Jews and Christians in Arabia at that time, and that I was reading them as if they were talking to an atheist.
No, what I'm saying, you say it when they lost all these with Allah angry with, and then you say it in Surah Al-Baqarah where even these two, the meaning where go related to the Jewish and Christian more than atheists, where I have a lot of difference between two.
Well, I think I sort of get your gist. Many people, for example, assume that where it says those upon whom is wrath, they assume that's the Jewish community, and when it says those who are lost, they assume that's the Christians. That is an interpretation. For example, At-Tabari gave it that interpretation. Few others have, others haven't. Not all the scholars are agreed upon that. Frankly, I don't have a difficulty with either point of view. You have to remember that the Quran was revealed through a particular religious community. And that, just like that woman I just mentioned, this is just an answer. This is not a dogmatic position. But just like that woman I just mentioned, the Quran was revealed to, and in some sense through, a particular religious community. Not a religious community, a particular community. How they understood those verses might be quite different from how I relate to them in the 20th century. But the Quran doesn't specifically say that those are Jews and those are Christians. It sort of relates those verses with a certain generality. It's because we as Muslims believe that the Quran is a revelation for all times and all places. So just as the people in Prophet Muhammad's time, peace be upon him, those verses had definite meaning and import to them, and they understand it in a very immediate way, especially when you consider the occasions of revelation, when you study the occasions of revelation. But that doesn't mean that those verses were limited to that occasion. In the 20th century, we could still approach those verses and get meaning from it in our current lives. So that's what I was trying to say. That I understand that, there are verses in the Quran that do refer to Jews and Christians explicitly. There are other verses that don't. And when we read those, we could learn quite a bit about it, about our own lives. We should not deprive ourselves of hearing the heavenly voice. We should not deprive ourselves of relating to this revelation personally. That's what I was trying to say. Sorry about that. We could discuss it later.
Another lecture tonight, inshallah. There will be another chance to listen to him and to ask him questions and to give your comments. Now, inshallah, we will conclude and we will have adhan for Salat al-Dhuhr. and we will move to the Musalla, inshallah, to have our salah, and then will be a lunch break. Jazakumullah khairan. Okay, just 1 minute, please, 1 moment. The food will be distributed for the brothers here in the cafeteria, for the sisters in that room there. And inshallah, alhamdulillah, the weather is very good outside, then you can carry your lunch and have it outside, inshallah. There is no eating will be here in that or in the mosque. Jazakumullah. And always, also brothers and sisters, you need to pick up your children from the babysitting now.
I walked in my office and the president said, listen, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد